In Bosque Valley, where the fields stretch quiet and the courthouse clock runs 10 minutes slow, morning usually arrives with nothing more consequential than the sound of the bakery bell or the rumor of rain. But on this flooded April day, something colder drifted through the narrow streets, a hush that traveled ahead of the patrol, cars smearing puddles as it pulled up to the chipped steps of the county courthouse. Inside, locals gathered the way they always had, pressed close on wooden benches. News traveled fast here, but never quite true. Most believed what they'd read. Daniel York, 68, veteran, loner, troublemaker. A man who spoke little and smiled less, who never missed a sunrise walk by the old railroad or a graveside visit to the wife the town forgot he'd buried. But now, wrists cuffed and back straight, Daniel York looked out through the glass of his own silence, unmoved by the murmur of neighbors, the stares of strangers, or the judge leafing through a folder labeled simply, assault, misdemeanor. He didn't offer explanations, didn't complain when they walked him in under the drizzle. Uniform replaced by faded flannel and boots that traced old, precise steps across the slick tile. To most, that quiet seemed like guilt. In the court clerk's gossip, it meant bitterness. For the deputy, it was defiance. But none saw what the old man carried beyond those shackled wrists, a burden far older, heavier than any act in the gas station parking lot. Not a soul in the room, not even the young public defender half-heartedly assigned to his case, bothered to ask about Daniel's medals or what the scars on his wrists meant. Fewer still remembered the years he'd spent on foreign soil, or the dozen men alive because of things he never spoke about. Here, in Bosque Valley, a hero's welcome ended at the parade route, and after the flags faded, so did the memory of sacrifice. Just as clouds gathered outside, a low current of anticipation built inside the courtroom. The press caught wind, sniffing for a story, lining the aisles with cameras and careful questions. But this morning, nothing about Daniel York's story seemed out of the ordinary. An elderly veteran, a minor skirmish, whispers of instability. The law would run its course, the sentence an afterthought. No one knew least of all Daniel, the tide about to break just beyond the town line. Wheels spinning on wet asphalt, an officer's salute rendered to a silhouette in the back of a government sedan. No one knew that a figure, a general, whose 4 silver stars had tilted the fate of battles, who'd once watched York save half a squad from oblivion, was already on his way. And before this day was done, the truths chained by years of silence and pain would fill this courthouse with a reckoning few could imagine. This is the story of an old Marine who tried to carry a war home quietly, a courtroom that nearly buried his honor, and the moment when the brotherhood of service proved stronger than all the chains a small town could forge. The first stirrings of the morning faded as Daniel York was brought into the courthouse, flanked by 2 deputies whose uniforms nearly matched the gray of the rain-soaked sky. No one rose to honor him. The man who had once stood ramrod straight beneath the weight of critical orders now sat rigid and silent, hands bound in front of him, his presence both a challenge and a confession. To the people of Bosque Valley, he was no longer Daniel the hero, but Daniel the suspect. His military past lived in the town's memory only as a cautionary tale, whispered over coffee in the diner. Too much war, too little softness, broken by foreign places that changed good men. His public defender, Anna Weathers, leafed through a file containing only the thin summary of yesterday's incident. There was a name for every moment since. Veteran agitation, verbal threat, physical intimidation. Absent were the pages that might detail the long months York spent crawling through sand and shattered stone. The silent patience of a sniper who had balanced the nation's hope on the weight of a trigger. No mention of the medals boxed and half-forgotten under the sagging bed in his trailer, or the photographs of unfamiliar, grateful faces which lined the walls nobody else ever visited. Anna had tried talking to York before the hearing, tried to break through the granite of his demeanor, to coax a story, a reason, a witness into the air between them. But Daniel's answers stayed clipped, non-committal, eyes constantly tracking a horizon only he could see. Decades spent waiting for movement, for danger, for the world to shift, had trained him to hold silence like a shield. Now, facing accusations he never bothered to rebut, he met the judge's gaze without flinching, as though this trial were simply another checkpoint in a life built around waiting for the next order. The townsfolk who filled the gallery scanned York for signs, regret, anger, confession. Instead, they found only exhaustion, a fatigue that had sunk deep, etched into furrows at his eyes and the set of his jaw. "He's probably lost it," someone murmured, and a ripple of agreement passed among those who'd never spoken to him, but who felt certain nonetheless. The victim, a younger man from the gas station, recounted a story of intimidation and military boasting, his words practiced, voice rising at the right moments to elicit sympathy. Even the bailiff, a former classmate of York's, averted his eyes as the narrative took hold. Above the benches, the flags of county and country hung limp in the humid air. Anna stood to ask a question, but York gave no sign of interest. To the jury, 12 people Daniel had likely known by face, if not by name, he seemed already judged. A man not defeated, but disconnected, perhaps even relieved to find himself answerable to something routine, something that offered, at last, a form of closure he could recognize. Outside, thunder rolled beyond the rows of oak and hickory. A blue sedan slowed for the red light at the edge of town, its headlights glinting on street glass. Inside, a figure in an immaculate jacket absent-mindedly traced the faded outline of a campaign patch near his wrist, eyes set on the courthouse rising ahead. Unbeknownst to the citizens of Bosque Valley, before that storm had passed, their tidy world would be forced to reckon not just with the old wounds of war, but with the quiet hero who had lived for years beside them, unnoticed and unthanked. And so the hearing began not with the clamor of justice, but in the flattened hush of small-town routine. Daniel York, man of few words, sat waiting to endure judgment one last time, even as his truest advocate drew nearer, carried by duty, memory, and a promise forged on another continent, in another life. It started with a parking space and a sore shoulder, as most small-town misunderstandings do. The details, repeated and rewritten in reports and town gossip alike, went like this. Daniel York had pulled into the Circle K on Main at 7:32 a.m., his battered pickup slotting into a space marked customer only. The rain had come hard overnight, and a river of water coursed along the curb. York moved with his usual deliberate precision, ignoring the nervous glances of a man in a dark hoodie idling by the storefront. Inside, the cashier would later say, he never said much, just nodded, paid cash, never caused trouble. But outside, tension simmered. The younger man from the hoodie, later identified as Trevor Metcalf, claimed Daniel elbowed past him, muttering words he didn't catch. Trevor, annoyed and emboldened by an audience of 2 other customers, called out after Daniel, jeering, "What's your hurry, old man? Still playing soldier?" Witnesses offered conflicting stories. Some swore Daniel's response was nothing but a hard stare. Others claimed he murmured, "Walk away. Nothing here for you." Trevor, pressing for a reaction, squared his stance. "You think you're tough? Who do you think you are?" That's when, allegedly, York replied, a phrase heard and repeated with more gusto than accuracy. "Don't push me, son. You don't know the things I've done to keep this country safe." The argument ended before it began. Trevor, perhaps feeling slighted, perhaps genuinely frightened by the coldness in York's eyes, called 911, reporting threats of violence and military intimidation. By the time deputies arrived, the story had morphed. York had attacked, his hands shaking with rage, his words a warning. The narrative, incomplete but compelling, carried from parking lot to precinct, from statement to charge sheet, all the way to the morning's docket. No weapon was found. No one was hurt, but the image was said old soldier, still at war with an enemy only he could see. Trevor sat in court in a soft neck brace, casting nervous glances at the shackled York across the aisle. He embellished freely for the Ada, painting a picture of a veteran holding the whole place hostage with his stare. When asked specifically what York had said, his answer shifted once more. He threatened to kill me, said he could do it from half a mile away. The phrase military sniper landed with a heavy thud, a fact none present could actually confirm. Anna Weathers pressed Daniel for clarification, for any context he could provide. But Daniel offered only the same answer he'd been giving for decades' silence. His loyalty from the battlefield to this broken moment was to restraint and quiet. He would not add fuel to any fire. Anna scribbled notes furiously, weighing her options, wishing she could call someone, anyone, who knew York better. Outside, as the rain battered the courthouse windows, the world beyond Bosque Valley spun on. News anchors speculated. A few veterans from nearby towns began to take note, and down a rural highway, a convoy of black cars pressed forward. In the lead sat a man with 4 stars riding his epaulette, memory heavy on his brow. He was neither young nor prone to drama, but he moved with urgency, driven by something deeper than command, by the burden of a debt. While the courtroom obsessed over a surly phrase and ancient medals gathering dust, the truer story waited at the edge of town, the chapter where Daniel York became more than an old man in handcuffs, where the war he'd carried in silence risked finally coming to light, not for glory, but for truth. With Daniel York seated at the defense table, the courtroom became a theater divided. The prosecution, quick to sense an easy win, painted a picture of volatility and danger, an old soldier unable to leave his violence behind. Trevor Metcalf, the self-styled victim, repeated his rehearsed details, voice trembling at the right words, milking the moment for sympathy. He glared at me like I was the enemy, said he could take me out from the parking lot. No problem. I felt threatened for my life, Your Honor. The clerk who'd rung up Daniel's coffee and newspaper only shrugged when called. He was quiet as always. Didn't see no fight. Another bystander, pressed by the prosecutor, stammered something about bad vibes and military talk, uncertain if what she remembered had come from her eyes or the swirl of gossip that followed. Throughout, York watched without reaction, face set as flint, mouth a thin line. His hands never moved except to scratch an old scar on his knuckles, a habit born of reflex, not rage. A town reporter live-tweeted the drama in clipped sentences. York stone-faced. Victim testifies, jury looks nervous. Anna Weathers, feeling every inch of her inexperience, tried in vain to break the narrative. Daniel York has lived here for decades, a Marine Corps veteran. No history of violence, no witnesses to any assault. Her words hovered, unconvincing, over the rows of frowning faces. She risked a glance at Daniel, hoping for help, a story, an apology, anything, but he gave her nothing, only that same glance out the window, as if searching for something beyond reach. To fill the vacuum of fact, the prosecution grew louder. This is not about service, it's about safety, proclaimed the Ada. What Mr. York once did overseas doesn't excuse what he's done here. Each phrase stacked brick upon brick, building a wall of fear between the jury and the man in the defendant's chair. Behind the scenes, whispers curled through the wooden pews. He's got PTSD. Heard he killed dozens, maybe hundreds. Should have stayed away from town folk. The myth of the dangerous veteran grew, fed by ignorance and a desire for an easy story, one that required no hard questions about sacrifice or the burdens carried home from war. Only the bailiff seemed uneasy. A large man with a badge dulled by decades, he shifted from foot to foot. Memory, perhaps stirring, of a young Daniel heading off to basic training thinner, hopeful, a head full of purpose instead of silence. He dared not speak up, though. In Bosque Valley, respect for authority ran just as deep as suspicion of outsiders, even those who'd once risked everything for the flag over the courthouse. As the morning wore on, the trial moved swiftly, Soon, closing arguments loomed. The jury prepared to set their verdict with a cold, short certainty. Anna pleaded one last time. You see a veteran, judged by accusation and assumption. Please look deeper. But in towns like this, history is often written by rumor and defense by those who shout the loudest. It was then, in that thickening pause before the judge's instructions, a pause heavy as the air before a storm, that the courtroom doors opened to reveal a figure in a perfectly pressed uniform, 4 silver stars flashing beneath the fluorescent lights. The room hushed. Even the oldest farmer in the back row straightened in his seat. Daniel York finally shifted in his chair, eyes flickering for the first time, not with fear, but with wary expectation. History, it seemed, was about to walk in through the rain and remind Bosque Valley that some battles aren't won until the right witness takes the stand. Even as the courtroom froze, time seemed to fold inward for Daniel York. The sight of the 4-star general stepping into the stale fluorescent light was not just a summons to the present, but a living breach in the wall he'd spent years erecting between himself and memories he couldn't forget. For a breathless instant, Daniel was no longer in Bosque Valley, but 17 years and half a world away. The steaming air of Helmand Province washing over him, each sense sharp as broken glass. The sand, the low drone of distant mortar, the staccato cadence of shouted orders. Men younger than Trevor Metcalf, frightened yet steady, pressed in mud and fear behind shattered masonry. There had been a mission, always a mission, but the days and hours blended together. Recon patrols, near-invisible movement, the silent language of hand signals. Daniel's hands, young and sure again, cradling the long rifle as if it were an extension of his own resolve. That day in the desert, the radios had failed. The squad was pinned after an ambush, 2 wounded, 1 missing, enemy fire raking the rubble. The lieutenant, a wiry man with haunted eyes, whispered frantic into the wind. Then, amid chaos, came the voice Daniel remembered now as the general's a captain then, calling for cover, ordering a last-ditch push. The odds were hopeless. Daniel York, shadow in the dust, had crawled to a shattered window and taken position. The world narrowed to the blur of his scope, the rhythm of breath and wind. He'd counted every round, every whispered plea, until, shot by shot, he cleared a path through the crossfire. 12 men were still breathing when the hump of a far-off helicopter signaled rescue. He had not wanted recognition. He did not stay for medals. But the captain found him, bloodied and shaking, and pressed Daniel's hand in a grip strong and silent, a brotherhood forged beyond words. Now, as General James Brogan walked down the aisle, the swirl of memory faded back into the reality of the small-town courtroom. The general moved with the ease of someone accustomed to command, but his eyes, under the cap's brim, searched the crowd until they found Daniel's to both, a spark of memory not dulled by time. The judge, startled, asked, "General Brogan, what brings you to Bosque Valley today?" Brogan's voice was clear, unwavering. "I'm here on official request, ma'am, to make a statement about the character and history of the man before you." His gaze flickered, gentle, toward Daniel. "It's time you all understood what true restraint and true service look like." For the first time since his arrest, Daniel York let the mask slip just enough for a flicker of recognition, equal parts relief, pain, and an old soldier's gratitude. Outside, the rain eased, hushed by the strange gravity now holding the room. In the gallery, whispers died. Phones were hastily turned off. Anna Weathers, sensing a shift larger than herself, quickly motioned to the judge. "Your Honor, I request permission for General Brogan to address the court." The judge nodded, unable to hide both her curiosity and respect for the decorated man before her. Daniel, shoulders taut but chin lifted, waited to see whether today would bring not only judgment, but the redemption promised only by those who truly understood the cost of silence. For the first time all morning, Hope began to taint the air, thin, tentative, but alive. The courtroom would soon understand the difference between a threat and a wounded guardian. Some stories, Daniel knew, would only be told by those who carried the scars to prove them. General Brogan moved to the witness stand, the subtle metals on his uniform catching the light as he settled in. Anna Weathers, her nerves held in check by the gravity of the moment, stood with her notepad against her chest, as if bracing for the impact of what might come next. The judge addressed the general formally, voice steeling itself for authority. "General Brogan, you may proceed." He began quietly, his gaze not on the jury, but on Daniel York, the bond between commander and soldier, an invisible thread in the silent space between them. "I served with Gunnery Sergeant Daniel York in Afghanistan and other conflict zones. I give you my word, this man's discipline and restraint have saved more lives than anyone in this room could know." Brogan's voice was a low river steady, undeniably sincere. "On an August morning in Helmand Province, our platoon was caught in a perfect kill zone. Communications were gone. The enemy had us surrounded. The court listened as Brogan painted the day with few careful words. The chaos, the desperation, the way Daniel had slipped into position, the world narrowed to a breath and a bead of sweat. He waited. He calculated. He didn't fire until he had no other choice, not one wasted shot. 12 men walked out of that alley because of Daniel. I was one of them." The prosecutor, restless, tried to redirect. "General, with all respect, today's incident," Brogan cut him off, not with rudeness, but with a command that brooked no challenge. "You think you've seen a threat. You have not stood in the dark, knowing you're alive, because a man like Daniel York decided to show mercy rather than take an easy shot. Restraint is not something you can measure in a police report." He faced the jury. "When soldiers come home, you want them to become invisible, quiet, safe. But war does not leave us." "Not entirely. Daniel has carried his burdens in silence. He has never asked for applause. All he wanted once is peace and respect for the sacrifice he and others made." The gallery, once whispering, now seemed to hold its collective breath. Some recognized their own sons or brothers in the general's words. The bailiff, hands folded, bowed his head slightly. Anna stepped forward to ask, "General, have you ever known Sergeant York to act in anger? To threaten without cause?" Brogan shook his head. "He is the calm in chaos. If he warned someone to walk away, it was not out of pride or rage, but out of deep knowledge of what could happen if he were not careful." He regarded Daniel with honest affection. "This man has saved lives both at war and at home by saying less, by doing less than he was ever capable of." The judge turned to Daniel. "Do you wish to make a statement?" "No, ma'am," he said, voice firm but quiet. "I think the general said it all." For the first time in years, Daniel felt the courtroom's gaze shift, not with suspicion, but with something softer. The lines dividing the town, the war, and the law grew faint. The pressure of a life's worth of silence lifted, if only for a moment, by the weight of truth finally spoken aloud. The weight of General Brogan's testimony hung heavy in the air as the judge dismissed the court for jury deliberation. 12 citizens, some who had long viewed Daniel York as a shadow on Main Street, others who had simply not known what to believe, filed into a room thick with unease. Silence lingered in the courtroom, thicker and more charged than in the hours before. Daniel was uncuffed, the bailiff's movements slower, almost reverent, as he guided him to a waiting bench. Anna Weathers sat beside him. Her expression changed, not just determined, but proud, if quietly anxious. "You did more by saying nothing than some men do in a lifetime of speeches," she whispered. Reporters gathered in clusters, whispering furiously into cell phones, scribbling headlines for an audience now far larger than Bosque Valley. The general stood by the window, hands clasped behind his back, lost in reflections of his own. "You don't leave men behind," he said softly, almost to himself. Not in the desert. Not here. Minutes stretched. Veterans, called by rumor and text, gathered quietly outside the courthouse doors. Faces lined with sympathy and the haunted knowledge only those who have survived war can understand. Some traded stories in low tones, never naming the things they'd left behind, but knowing now that Daniel's burden was carried by all of them. Inside, the town and its wounds seemed suspended. The gallery's old prejudices held at bay by awe and the slow understanding dawning on once hardened faces. Even Trevor Metcalf, neck brace crooked, shrank into his seat. The anxious mask of a victim was replaced by the blanch of doubt. And for Daniel, a hush descended that was all too familiar. The breath before verdict, the aged rhythm of waiting for consequences that came without warning or reason. 10 minutes passed. Then 20. Across the aisle, Anna stilled her hands, repeating under her breath the numbers of character witnesses she'd counted, hoping, perhaps, that this time the truth would be heavier than fear. The jury returned. Faces tense, some tear-streaked, others unreadable. The judge called everyone to rise. Outside, thunder rumbled again. At this time, it sounded less like a warning and more like the world exhaling a great, painful truth. Before the jury could speak, General Brogan, abandoning decorum, moved and knelt before Daniel. "Forgive us," he said, but enough for all the town to hear. "Forgive this country, this court, for forgetting you." His gesture was not showmanship, but ritual, an offering of dignity owed and long withheld. The courtroom, witnessing the general's humility before the stoic veteran, was changed, if only for this one verdict, this one day. The judge took in the moment, a soldier's silence, a general's apology, a town's witness to what true honor demands. She nodded to the jury foreman, the fate of Daniel York moments from being set. The jury filed back in, their faces marked by the journey they'd taken, some carrying uncertainty, others reflecting the slow dawn of empathy. Everyone in the gallery, Daniel included, held their breath as the foreman passed the envelope to Judge Milligan. She opened it with practiced solemnity, looking over the verdict as if the balance of decades weighed in her hands. "Will the defendant please rise?" Daniel York stood, just as he had on countless parade fields and battle lines, back straight, eyes forward, face betraying nothing. "In the matter of State versus York, on the charge of assault, how do you find the defendant?" The foreman's voice was soft but unwavering. "Not guilty." The words landed softly at first, taking a moment to settle over the room. There was no eruption, no fanfare, just the release of a tension that had bound every chest for hours. Anna exhaled with something close to a sob. Brogan allowed himself the smallest, proudest nod. The bailiff, who a lifetime ago had played baseball with Daniel on these very streets, stood a bit taller, his own eyes shining. Judge Milligan's expression softened further as she addressed the freed man. "Mr. York, you are released from all charges. This court recognizes the sacrifices you have made on and off the battlefield. You owe us no more answers." With shaking hands, Anna gathered her notes, unsure if she should say anything more. Daniel managed a small nod in her direction. "Thank you," he said. To Brogan, the gratitude went unspoken of veterans' communion, as real in silence as in speech. Trevor Metcalf left the courtroom first, his neck brace removed, gaze turned downward, not shamed, but perhaps chastened. A young man suddenly forced to re-examine what a real threat looks like. The townsfolk, once so eager for a simple tale of good and bad, filtered slowly out, their conversations low, reflective. Some offered Daniel quiet nods of respect as they passed. Others lingered in the doorway, the story sitting heavy in their minds, a reminder that understanding is never reached by rumor, but by seeing the heart beneath the scars. Daniel paused by the general as he made his way to the exit. Brogan extended his hand, a gesture of respect, a friendship forged first in survival, now affirmed in honor. They gripped hands, the years and miles between them collapsing for just an instant. "Keep walking forward, son," Brogan said, voice thick. Daniel managed a smile, faint, tired, but genuine. Outside, the clouds had broken, the first rays of sunlight pushing bravely through the remnants of the storm, glinting off the wet streets and melting the shadows from the courthouse wall. For Bosque Valley, the day would move on, but those present would not soon forget the trial that became a testament, not just to justice, but to the enduring hope that, even in the quietest lives, greatness walks among them. And for Daniel York, freedom was nothing new. But at last, in the eyes of his neighbors and the gentle weight of the general's hand, came absolution, the kind earned not from survival alone, but from letting the world, finally, see who he really was. When the courthouse finally emptied and the last camera vans retreated, Daniel York lingered outside beneath the strangely gentle sunlight. The silence of newfound freedom settled over him, not like a sudden gift, but as if the world had gently exhaled, returning a balance that should never have been disrupted. He walked past the old veterans gathered on the courthouse steps, exchanging nods and silent words that only those who have shared the burdens of war truly understand. A few offered their hands, a slap on the back, a look that said, "We saw you. We remember." For the first time in years, Daniel let these gestures touch him, their weight lighter and warmer than any metal could have been. General Brogan waited by his car, cap in hand, the formality of his posture softened by memory and pride. "You did well," he told Daniel quietly. "And I meant every word about restraint, about honor. Don't let this town, or any other, make you forget your worth." They stood together for a moment, not as hero and witness, nor as defendant and advocate, but as two old soldiers recognizing each other's scars visible and buried alike. Daniel finally spoke, voice lower than the breeze, rich with the gravity of all that went unsaid. "It's easier to fight for peace out there," he nodded toward the horizon, "than to hold on to it in here." He tapped his chest. "But I'll try, for them and for me." Brogan smiled, eyes crinkling. "That's all any of us can do." They parted without fanfare, the general's car disappearing down the road. Daniel turned away from the courthouse, boots pressing into soft earth, each step deliberate toward his truck, toward his home at the edge of the woods, and toward a long, patient healing. As the days passed in Bosque Valley, news of the trial faded back into the fabric of local myth. Yet those who had witnessed or even simply heard knew this story would change the way the town measured its sons and its silence. On Memorial Day, Daniel found a few more flags planted at the veteran stones, a few more nods from strangers on his morning walks. And sometimes, when the sun broke over the trees, he allowed himself to remember, not the sounds or the terror of war, but the brotherhood, the mercy, and the small, persistent hope that dignity survives even the fiercest storms. He had lived most of his life refusing recognition, believing that quiet sacrifice was its own reward. But having seen the day when his silence was finally understood, Daniel York carried forward with a little less weight and a little more peace. And somewhere in the distance, far from courtrooms and headlines, honor walked quietly at his side, unseen by most, unforgettable by some.